Baiba Braže is Latvia's foreign minister. Does she think NATO is measuring up to the danger?
I think we can rely on NATO, absolutely. The preparedness and taking the sort of what we see in terms of Russia's capabilities, what we see in Russia's warfare in Ukraine, the intentions, all of us have to take it seriously. And I think that is why Washington is sometimes expressing its frustration in a ways that maybe we in Europe don't do that. But that message has been coming from the United States since 50s. There is nothing new about it
But
at
what
all
I
stages.
guess what's new though is a couple of months ago, I think it was at a meeting in Tallinn that Thomas Dinano, the US Undersecretary of State, he was asked a direct question: were the Baltic states to be attacked, would America send troops to fight? And he hemmed and he hawed and he refused to say yes. And that seems to be a major change.
I don't think so, because the way it works is that our commanders don't actually need any signal if they see military indicators. They know we are committed, all of us. The troops are there, US troops are there on the ground in Europe and in the Baltics. And it's all...
And you think that US troops
we don't
will
need
be
US
there and will remain there?
Yes, of course. We don't need, and of course, it matters what countries themselves do. Why do we in Europe expect Americans to come and do something if Europeans wouldn't do something? That's why we say yes, that we will fight from the first moment if that's necessary. And that's what our allies are saying. We have 4,000 allies with us in Latvia. So, whether US undersecretaries ask something in a conference publicly, that is a different thing. The way how military planning and deterrence and defense works.
Sure, but I mean, you'll also be
different.
aware that Pete Hegseth has talked about redeploying troops out of Europe, and as indeed has President Trump. I just wonder when it comes to
currently there are about 100,000 plus minus US troops in Europe, in many of the bases, including in those that are meant for power projection, for the Middle East and other parts. And that's why also Washington's reaction to certain expressions by Europeans was not exactly very friendly when those bases where the US has invested as the biggest NATO ally suddenly, were denied, or the airspace was denied. So it depends where you are and how you look at issues. That's why I always try to explain to allies that public commentary not necessarily is the best way to achieve unity.
Right.
Well,
of course, that's exactly what I'm asking you to engage in right now. And I just wonder, I mean, you talk about, absolutely, there's a responsibility for Europeans to do more, and you could argue that Donald Trump has been rather successful in driving increases in defense expenditure. And I know that Latvia...
Russians have been successful.
Well, yes, you could argue that as well. I know that Latvia is up at about 4.73% of GDP. I think the latest figures are on defense.
It will be 4.9 by the end of the year, and
right.
It will be 5% next
But
year.
equally, you look at two of the more major military powers in Europe, Britain and France. I think they're projected to be up at 2.7% by 2030, with no clear pathway, certainly as far as the UK is concerned, of getting to the NATO target of 3.5% by 2035. I'm going to ask you a question which perhaps for a diplomat is rather difficult, because it could invite an undiplomatic response, but don't you think that's a bit poor?
Both countries you mentioned, your own and France, are nuclear powers, and with nuclear weapons, of course, there's a whole set of different expenditure and responsibilities that come with it that just ties up the funding in a very particular way. So, and then on top of that, adding conventional spending and doing that in a sort of credible, concise manner is indeed something that is needed, but also doing that quickly is not necessarily easily achievable. So that's why we very much welcome the commitment both by UK and France to do that. And indeed, speed matters, but also how to do that matters. So we won't go out criticizing most of the countries that provide nuclear deterrence for others in NATO in somehow doing something wrong.
That was the Foreign Minister of Latvia, Baiba Braže, struggling through a sore throat, but making her message pretty clear.